You know you can't say no to both of them. The phrase was said with a smile. A toast between crystal glasses. But the tone was loaded with gunpowder. The room was luxurious, tucked away on the 19th floor of the Johannesburg Marriott. The lights were low. The cocktail was part of the International Afro-Eurasian Investment Summit, but everyone knew, the real dispute was not about numbers. It was about who would control Ibrahim Traoré without appearing to control him. In that hall, a man in a gray suit from the Russian delegation approached cordially. He was carrying a small wooden case. Inside it was a golden model of a Sukhoi 57 fighter and a hand-signed parchment. For the ally who dares to resist. That same night, the Chinese entourage presented him with a jade sculpture and a silent proposal, an $8 billion line of credit for infrastructure, telecommunications and defense, with fraternal interest. Traoré smiled with the politeness of a statesman. But he didn't answer. Neither to one nor to the other. And that's when the tension began. Enjoy and subscribe to the channel. While the rest of the guests were giving speeches about shared future, two superpowers looked at a man who wouldn't say yes, and that was intolerable. Hours later, in a private room, one Russian advisor whispered to another, "He's putting on a show of charm. He'll accept Moscow in the end." At the other end of the floor, a Chinese analyst was typing an urgent report. Traoré showing unexpected resistance. May need soft pressure. But what neither side knew was that in room 2007 of that same hotel, while everyone else was talking business and diplomacy, Ibrahim Traoré was writing by hand in a simple black notebook. He was sketching an idea that would have seemed crazy to any African head of state in the last 100 years. What if Africa didn't choose between East and West? The next morning, the sun was rising slowly over Johannesburg when Traoré left his hotel with a simple gesture. He refused the diplomatic convoy. He walked with his two bodyguards down a side street. He stopped at a small local cafe, sat at a table overlooking the rebuilding city, and ordered black coffee and bread with butter. From there, he called Bamako, Niamey and Khartoum. Short conversations. Direct. What if we didn't accept either Moscow or Beijing? What if we created our own survival pact? The reactions were cautious. But none were negative. In the afternoon, the summit resumed. The panel would be on South-South cooperation. But everyone knew it was the most dangerous geopolitical battlefield of the decade. Russia wanted unfettered access to minerals and a forward military base to counter NATO influence in the south. China wanted logistical expansion, a strategic position for its new Silk Road and lithium concessions. And they both wanted something even more symbolic, the image of Traoré signing alongside them, as a silent declaration that Africa had chosen. But he didn't sign anything. In the plenary session, he made only one short speech. Before building bridges with the world, perhaps we should learn to walk among ourselves. He was applauded, by some. Looked at with suspicion by many. The Russian ambassador crossed his arms. The Chinese representative took notes frantically. Traoré? He just left the room. But behind the scenes, tectonic plates were moving. That same night, in Ouagadougou, his team activated a discreet protocol. Convene leaders of 4 African nations for a secret meeting in 3 weeks. Topic: Intercontinental strategic autonomy. No external powers. No conditional alliances. In the dark hotel room, his military aide murmured, "Captain, the world will not let that happen." And Traoré replied, without looking up, "The world has let everything happen until now. Now, it will have to see." 3 days after the summit, a Russian military plane landed discreetly in Ouagadougou. There were no soldiers or cargo on board. Just a 3-man entourage, all civilians, all experts in unofficial diplomacy. They were received in an annex of the air base by 2 Burkinabe ministers. Nothing was announced. No statement was made. But those who observed them knew it was more than a courtesy visit. The Russian proposal came in 3 layers. The first was military, anti-aircraft defense systems, armored vehicles and consultants to train local forces against insurgency. all under the condition of allowing shared use of a logistics corridor that would link Niger to the Atlantic coast via Burkinabe territory. The second energy era, construction of a low-cost mini-nuclear power plant to supply the capital. Russia would provide the technology and take care of security. The third, more subtle, diplomatic support at the UN and blocking future sanctions with veto power in the Security Council. Autonomy with support, they called it. At the end of the meeting, one of the envoys said calmly, "The West has already isolated it. China wants to shape it. Only Russia wants to protect it without changing it." The phrase hung in the air like political bait. 2 days later, it was China's turn. While Russia was operating in the military field, Beijing was betting on economic seduction. 3 major Chinese state-owned companies announced, on the same day, their interest in operating in Burkina Faso. Railway lines, 5G, solar plants. Investment packages with figures that no African country would easily refuse. A special envoy was sent to Traoré's office. He brought a formal proposal. China respects its independence. But we believe that the future lies in connectivity. We want Burkina Faso to be the center of integration of the new Silk Road in West Africa. And then came the central point. We are ready to buy, for 30 years, all the lithium that your nation can extract. At a fixed price. And our infrastructure. It wasn't an invitation. It was a golden trap. Traoré listened to everything. He didn't refuse. He didn't accept either. He just said, "If my freedom costs so much, perhaps it is worth more than what they are offering me." The Chinese envoy did not respond. He just smiled. But deep down, he understood that the captain was not an easy man to bend. That same night, 2 documents landed on the Burkinabe president's desk. One with the Russian seal. The other with the red coat of arms of Chinese diplomacy. They both waited for an answer. Traoré read them. Once, twice, 3 times. And so he called a private meeting with 4 people, his security advisor, the Minister of Mines, a historian and a young analyst who had barely turned 30. The meeting lasted a little over an hour. The historian spoke about the Treaty of Berlin. The minister spoke about figures. The young analyst said, hesitantly, "Captain, what if we say no to both of them?" There was silence. Then Traoré looked up from the Russian document and said, "China sees soil. Russia sees war. But who sees our people?" And then he continued, "The world wants to buy what we have. But no one wants to see who we are. The mistake would be to accept any help that turns us into the shadow of empires. The answer is no. For both." The room fell silent. But the plan was already clear. The next morning, 2 telegrams were sent. One to Beijing. The other to Moscow. The contents were identical. Burkina Faso appreciates the willingness of the powers. But at this time, it has chosen to strengthen its continental cooperation. The response was discreet. But in Moscow, a general stood up from the breakfast table and shouted. He refused both? What game is this? The game had changed. And only Traoré knew the ending. The chosen location was not on diplomatic agendas. It was not a palace, nor a conference room with flags in the background. It was an old abandoned monastery in southern Burkina Faso, restored only with sunlight and makeshift wooden tables. There, Ibrahim Traoré was waiting for 4 men. They arrived at different times, via different routes. From Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta, with a closed face, with eyes that trusted almost no one. From Niger, General Abdourahmane Tiani, discreet, carrying with him handwritten intelligence reports. From Guinea, Mamadi Doumbouya, direct, dressed as if he were still in the barracks. And from Sudan, the interim defense minister, representing a government in chaos. There were no cameras. There was no media. Just silence, sweat, and dusty maps on the table. Traoré received them standing up. "Thank you for coming. There is no official agenda. Just one question. Are we ready to stop choosing between those who want us as pawns?" Goïta was the first to respond. "We have lost more with alliances than in wars." Doumbouya muttered. "But what if we fail alone?" Traoré pointed to the ground. This ground has bled too much for us to continue kneeling. Tianyi cast a slow glance over the others' faces. We are at war. But the real war is not with the insurgents. It's with the idea that we can't win without someone from the outside. Over the next few hours, the four leaders built, piece by piece, the foundation of something that had never before been successfully attempted, an autonomous African alliance, without Chinese funding, without Russian weapons, without Western treaties. On the walls of the monastery, they pasted maps with handwritten notes. Lines marking fragile borders, strategic transport points, natural resource mines, abandoned radio stations. Traoré's proposal was clear. We have united our armed forces in joint operations. We have created a sovereign wealth fund between the 5 countries, using gold and land as a basis. We have set up our own encrypted telecommunications system. No foreign satellites. No loans. Silence. Then Doumbouya gave a half-smile. That sounds crazy. Traoré responded without hesitation. Even crazier is to continue asking for permission to exist. From there, the outline of what would later be called African Dignity Pact. A simple name, but with a historical weight that would still be felt. Outside, no one knew about the meeting. American, Russian, or French surveillance drones didn't even know where to look. And even if they did, they wouldn't recognize the place. Because what was being built there was not a political agreement. Era an oath of survival among equals. Hours later, at sunset, the African leaders left the place as they had arrived, separate, discreet, almost invisible. But in their pockets they carried handwritten copies of an informal memorandum. No signature. No letterhead. The last paragraph said, "We will not ask for support. We will not ask for permission. Whoever wants to walk with us, let him walk on the ground we walk on. Whoever wants to observe us, let him do so from a distance." That night, upon returning to the office, an aide showed Traoré the intelligence report. Russia has reactivated espionage channels in the Sahel. China has requested an urgent meeting via the embassy. And the American ambassador has asked for an informal visit. Traoré looked out the window. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Now they will come. But not for us. They will come out of fear that we have met. Because deep down, everyone knew. If Africa discovered that it could walk on its own 2 feet, no one would control it anymore." The Western press was the first to react. The New York Times published an article entitled, "Is Africa Turning Away from the World?" A depict followed. Russia and China court the Sahel, but Traoré refuses to dance. In China, the tone was different. Xinhua announced coldly. Burkina's inconsistency could threaten the progress of the new Silk Road. And in Moscow, an editorial from the Russia Today fired. Traoré is risking a strategic rupture with those who offered him protection. The diplomatic response was even more direct. In less than 5 days, Burkina Faso received 7 formal meeting requests. 3 from Russia. 2 from China. 1 of the United States. 1 from the African Union. None were accepted. In Washington, the State Department held a private session with the ambassador of Burkina Faso. The central question was always the same. "What are you doing?" But they didn't get a clear answer. Because the real answer was outside the diplomatic corridors. I was in Accra, Ghana, where, without warning, Traoré showed up to participate in a student congress on Pan-Africanism. There was no protocol. Nor was there any presence of the international press. On the improvised stage of a public university, in front of more than 3,000 young people, he spoke for 9 minutes. He didn't read. He didn't give a speech. He just talked. "You want to know what we're doing? We're doing what we were told couldn't be done. We're trying to own our own agenda. It's not rebellion. It's memory. Because every map we didn't draw has been used against us." The audience did not applaud immediately. Silence came first. One of those silences that say more than 1,000 words. And then the applause. The video of the speech, recorded by a student, went viral. In less than 48 hours, it was circulating in more than 40 countries. Improvised translations appeared in French, Arabic, English, Spanish, and Swahili. In France, the newspaper The World called the speech, "Dangerous Revenge." In China, State TV asked, "If Africa rejects its traditional partners, is it ready to walk alone?" But something deeper was going on. In Ethiopia, Parliament temporarily suspended a session to screen the video. In Algeria, young people projected Traoré's image with the speech's phrase onto a government building. In South Africa, student protests have taken to chanting, "Every map we didn't draw was used against us." While the world was busy commenting, criticizing and warning, Traoré remained silent. He didn't give interviews. He did not accept invitations to summits. He continued his silent work with the allied nations of the pact. An advisor of his summed up the situation in one sentence: "The media wants to know who is behind him. But what's scary is that no one is." From the Russian side came the most explicit threat. A Moscow diplomat, speaking at a conference in Minsk, stated, "Refusal to align can have strategic consequences. Neutrality is a myth in times of global war." In practice, the Russians stopped a batch of military equipment that was already in transit to Niger. China, in turn, cancelled the bilateral infrastructure tender and froze a regional investment fund. But none of these actions seemed to alter Traoré's course. He was playing another game. One where the risk wasn't being punished. The risk was be forgotten by history itself. In the same week, it was revealed that Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger had created a joint digital communications hub, a secure network without reliance on foreign infrastructure. The name of the project, why? A tribute to the peasant woman who is a symbol of African resistance to external domination. The message was clear. It wasn't rebellion. Era silent reconstruction. And the silence was starting to bother me more than any direct confrontation. The announcement arrived 36 hours in advance. The presidency of Burkina Faso called the African press to a press conference in Ouagadougou. Without intermediaries. Without a list of pre-approved questions. Without official broadcasts from major international agencies. The location? The old Teatro Popular, closed years ago and restored by local youth with community funds. The symbol was clear. It was not a state event. It was a call to the continent. The world stopped. Beijing demanded a presence. Moscow tried to send correspondents. France sent a military attaché. But entry was denied. Only African press and independent media. The rules were being rewritten. The room was packed. Makeshift microphones. Simple equipment. No pomp. When Ibrahim Traoré took the stage, the atmosphere was suspended, as if time was waiting for his words. He spoke for 14 minutes. No interruptions. No translators. No cuts. The whole world listened online, translated in real time by volunteers, by activists, by young people who knew they were witnessing something rare. For centuries, the world has offered us alliances. All with labels, interest rates, and behavior manuals. They have told us who we should hang out with. And who we should fear. But we have decided that enough is enough. Today, the African Dignity Pact is born. Absolute silence. And then he continued. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Guinea and Sudan have decided that sovereignty cannot be divided. We will no longer accept conditionalities disguised as cooperation. We will no longer accept maps drawn by others. We will build our own path. The local press was crying. Some tried to hold the camera steady, but their eyes were shaking. In the audience, a student shouted in a whisper. He's saying what we've been waiting for 100 years. Traoré concluded with a phrase that would become a symbol, graffiti, tattoo, flag. The hand that helps me today may want to dominate me tomorrow. I choose to walk with those who bleed on the same ground as me. That was the line that crossed the planet. In South Africa, it was read in public. In Algeria, graffitied on the walls of the old colonial city. In France, it was mentioned in Parliament with indignation. In the US, it was commented on in national security panels as an act of dangerous disruption. In less than 24 hours, the African Dignity Pact became the most discussed topic on the planet. Russia issued a harsh statement. Burkina Faso is wasting a historic opportunity for protection and development with traditional partners. Neutrality is unstable. Ingratitude is even more so. China was more diplomatic, but direct. We believe that progress comes from global partnership. Isolation may be romantic, but it is unsustainable. France has called its European allies to an emergency session. The United States pressed the African Union for a statement of formal concern. But Traoré did not back down. The morning after the speech, he was seen walking alone through the streets of Ouagadougou. Without security. Without the press. Accompanied only by a notebook and a pen. On the cover, handwritten. What is not said with the body will not be remembered with the soul. Hours later, the governments of Mali, Niger and Guinea publicly confirmed their adherence to the pact. Sudan remained silent, but internal sources confirmed tacit support. What started as a symbolic gesture was now a real coalition. Shared infrastructure. Common financial system based on natural reserves. Integrated regional defense force. All this, without asking permission. Outside, the world reacted with suppressed fury and bewilderment. Within Africa, the continent was breathing something new. It wasn't nationalism. Era continental belonging. And that, for the great powers, was more dangerous than any nuclear arsenal. The international response was immediate. The European Union announced that it would review all cooperation agreements with countries that are signatories to the African Dignity Pact. The G7 called the alliance a risk to global stability and progress. The UN Security Council has convened an extraordinary session. But what caught the most attention was the proposal for a new round of multilateral sanctions. Financial, commercials, technological. Russia and China, despite being adversaries in the dispute over Traoré, were now converging in frustration. Both countries cut back on ongoing projects in the region, like someone removing a plate from the table of a guest who refuses to eat. The global press was divided. Some editorials called the pact populism disguised as sovereignty. Others saw it as the most authentic African renaissance since independence. But within Africa, the movement only grew. Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Togo and Chad have officially requested to begin accession talks to the pact. Angola sent a confidential letter. We observe with interest the birth of a new path. Even Cape Verde, small, isolated and dependent on partnerships with Europe, requested a technical mission to understand how the cooperation network works. Traoré, who had refused alliances with the most powerful, was now sought after by his own. His office became a hub for continental coordination. Previously invisible Burkinabe technicians began coordinating projects with colleagues from Bamako, Niamey and Conakry. A new communication channel, entirely on African servers, was launched with the symbolic name, Kantara, Bridge, in several languages of the continent. But along with the enthusiasm came the storm. The sanctions began to take effect. Banks cut credit lines. Platforms suspended services. Large companies closed operations without prior notice. In less than 60 days, inflation rose, reserves began to fall, and the noise of internal criticism began to grow. In Burkina Faso's parliament, an opposition MP stood up in the middle of a session and shouted, "You sacrificed our economy for an ideal. What now? Are you going to feed our people with dignity?" Traoré listened motionless. Then he stood up, walked to the microphone and answered, "It is better to fast with dignity than to feast under a leash. Whoever wants to return to the lap of those who hurt us is free to do so. But I was elected to prevent our future from being decided by others." The phrase spread across the continent. Even among those who were beginning to doubt, there was respect. He had not faltered. He had chosen. The following week, an informal proposal reached his office. A European bloc and an Asian power offered a temporary moratorium on sanctions in exchange for external intermediation in the pact. The response was delivered without a letter, without a protocol. Traoré simply made a statement on national television. "We did not create this pact to be saved. We created it to be free. And freedom cannot be outsourced." Abroad, the impact was immediate. In Africa, the phrase became a song. Sung by students. Repeated on the radio. Written on murals, tattooed on skin, chanted by young people who had never heard the name of a president who did not belong to their country before, but who now felt like they were part of the same history. And so what began as a diplomatic denial became a doctrine. A new path. No external model. No manual. No guarantees. But with one commitment. Between making mistakes on our own or getting things right under someone else's command, we choose the first option. In the silent corridors of the People's Palace, Traoré walked alone, as he always did. One of his aides caught up with him, holding a dossier with falling economic figures. "Captain, we're under pressure. Do you want to see the indicators?" He stopped. He looked out the window. And he answered, "Not now. I want to see the maps." The advisor hesitated. "The maps?" Traoré smiled. "The ones we're going to draw. Because the old ones are no longer useful." And that night, for the first time in over a century, a new map was beginning to be drawn from Africa, not to divide it, but to unite it. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes Africa must ask for permission to be free. And if you believe dignity is worth more than deals, subscribe. Because this is not just a story about Traoré. It's about all of us who are done being told where we belong.